Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Airspeed's Korra Rewatch video. This one's going to be for K407 Reunion. And I think it's fair to say this is a fairly disappointing episode for what it's actually about. Anyone says to you, like, are you excited for the episode where Korra returns to Republic City after 3 years, meets Mako, Asami, Tenzin and so on for the first time in 3 years? Everyone is like, yes, absolutely. These reunion scenes, like, look how well they did her reunion with the Air Kids. This should be really, really good. Unfortunately, it ends up being a bit disappointing. It just is kind of like they're taking a box. Yeah, she's back with her friends, fine. They don't really treat it as being anything overly specific or important. And they attempt to bring it up. They almost get to a point where they're going to address something. But then they have I suppose the classic thing of like, close friends are fighting, but they get over it in like the heat of a kind of big action scene. They do that in this episode, when I think it would have worked for almost any other situation, but this specific situation I think needed to have it be talked out. And what I'm talking about is that she comes back, obviously, she meets, I think it's like Boomy first in a way, that then, you know, Tenzin and Co come in, and that's fine, you know. It's just they have to kind of get down to business, tell everyone what happened in Zaofu, and then it's pretty much just getting down to like meeting her friends. So we get to see Korra's new so it's end of book 4 outfit, which I think is great. The character redesign here is perfect. They use elements of her book 1 and 3 design with elements of the book 2 outfit, which I much prefer the book 2 outfit, and kind of combine them together into like the perfect, you know, like slightly older Korra design, and I think it just looks outstanding. And it's why, like, whenever there's merchandise now and it is book 3 or 1 Korra, I'm always a little bit like, you know, why can't you do book 4 Korra, which is the one where, if you've watched the series, you can remember her as primarily. So they get that right, absolutely. As for the meeting with Mako and Asami, which should be the big part of the episode, it's just a thing that's kind of there. Like, with Asami, you get probably the only clear-cut scene that suggests Korra and Asami as like a potential relationship. That is, they meet up, they hug, Asami compliments Korra on her new hair, and she blushes. And the reason you interpret this as romantic is because Iki also complimented her on her hair, and she didn't blush at that compliment. So it's not just a case of Korra like being like, oh, she struggles to accept compliments. There's something specific about the fact that Asami complimented her here, and that's why she blushed. So that's fine. But like, that to set up the fact that they later become a couple, like, it's one small scene which should be the kind of start of a couple of little small scenes to get to the point where when they go out and start dating, it's not a shock like it kind of ends up being, and is more of a like, I was waiting for that to happen. And it just compare like how they did the Korra Mako relationship at the start compared to how they start Korra and Asami. You know, you have Mako and Korra like staring across the kind of bay at each other, you know, the bit of water between Air Temple Island and the city. You have little moments as they kind of get to know each other, like her wearing the scarf, you know, her suggesting that they go in as a couple to the rally to stay undercover. They kind of fall asleep next to each other and get embarrassed when they wake up. Those type of little moments where it's not like super clear cut they're a couple now, but that there is a dynamic between them where there is an attraction between both of them, and, you know, you're building towards that relationship. And it's just that sort of stuff that's not really present with Korra and Asami's relationship, because, as we've talked about, outside of like the recent thing here with Korra and Hiroshi, with Asami and Hiroshi, she hasn't had a lot going on in the series full stop. Whether that be a character arc of her own, or notable like character interactions with her friends. And so she's always felt to me like the weakest of the main cast, just because they don't use her enough. And given that you're trying to set up a relationship with her at the end, she just doesn't feel like they've given her the level that she kind of should be on that. There's a hug with Mako and Korra, of course, but the problem is that immediately you kind of present this distraction of Wu is with them. And the Wu dynamic is meant to be this kind of thing where he's going to add humor to this. He's going to get in the way of, them talking to each other. And that's all it does. It's not this humorous getting in the way of all this emotion type stuff that's going on here. It just is a pure distraction from really getting to the root of like these problems that they have. Because what I find interesting about this is that they go for them being a bit upset at Korra for not talking to them for the last 3 years. And I like that. I really do like that they go for, it's not the perfect reunion. Her closest friends are a bit upset that they didn't really get contacted by her for all this time. And that's good. The problem is that it gets ignored. Korra tries to explain herself but really can't, because she really doesn't know in a way why. And this is why the whole like, why did you contact Asami and not me kind of situation feels like one of the weirdest dynamics ever. Because I never really interpret it as, oh well, this is a clear demonstration of Korra and Asami's close relationship, because like, you're using that as an example of why they are close instead of like other scenes suggesting why they are close, and this just being an example of that. Whereas like you're using the letter as like, oh no, this is the proof of like not a lot of scenes beforehand getting to there. And it's why like I've always felt that if there was one person she should have wrote to at the time, given the development of her, with her friendship with Asami, with her friendship with Mako, with her friendship with Bolin, it probably is Mako that she should have wrote to, purely because they had the relationship. They've been in the closest relationship of the group. He would be the one who in a way understands her the best, and that's kind of been the way that they've wanted to leave that relationship. And as we'll see, it's where they eventually get to at the end of this book, is really getting across that the dynamic that Mako and Korra are going to have is basically they are like best friends, that they will be for each other like a person they can depend on for almost anything. And because of that, why is there no letter to Mako? Because it's not like the letter that is sent is like Korra really saying anything that she can't say to Mako or Bolin. And I think this is the problem with it, is that they want to use this as like a piece a scene that shows that they've set up Korra and Asami because they're close, when nothing in the scene inherently gets that across. And this is the problem with, I think, a lot of the Korra and Asami scenes, of just, they make the mistake of basically saying any scene where Korra and Asami are in the same scene together, regardless of what they're talking about, is immediate like an example that they're closer than any other relationship. And that's where I really don't get into it, apart from this blush scene. Because it's almost the idea that like Asami and Korra could just have a talk about like the most mundane thing in the world, and it's just them talking about anything, and it's proof that like they're the closest like people in the show. And that's to me always been the weakness of this, and that we'll look into it in like especially the next episode, of just opportunities that they had to give Korra and Asami clear-cut development towards a start of a relationship at the end of the show that they don't commit to. 8 is the perfect example of it, and a way they really could have made that episode at least somewhat worthwhile. But let's get into it. Wu ends up getting kidnapped, which of course complicates the entire episode, in that the dynamic immediately shifts from just it's action. It's a big action scene as they try to get Wu back from being kidnapped. And I like it from the perspective of this is Korra's return. You think she should be like very lacking in confidence after the whole Kabira thing, but she's really kind of on the ball here. You can see that like she has recovery to go through, but it's just something to give her that like 100% edge. She's like at like 95% here in that she's able to accomplish this mission. There's just something that's missing that she doesn't quite know about yet, and I like that. In that you really see her taking command. She jumps immediately back into being part of Team Avatar, as do Mako and Asami. Mako's doing the police stuff. Asami's doing like the driving. She gets a little bit involved in the action later on, and it's it's fine. It's the Team Avatar dynamic. It's just that in the grand scheme of this show, Team Avatar is not together all that much in action or in talking scenes, and I'd much prefer a scene of just them talking to get across the dynamic rather than an action scene. It's the Red Lotus problem in a way of just when you do nothing but do action with them, you present an aspect of their character, but you don't really get into like the core of their character, what their personality is, and that's really what's present here. You present some clear issues of Mako is upset that he wasn't contacted by Korra. Asami is upset because while she got one letter, she doesn't like the fact that Korra has returned and is just immediately like, let's get back into things, and kind of snaps at Korra for offering advice about Hiroshi, when the obvious, I suppose, interpretation of this is that here is Korra, who was kind of in a way unwilling to accept help from her friends, and she's immediately offering help to everyone the second she comes back. And that's a bit of the kind of like the issue of like, why do you feel so confident just immediately coming back and offering advice when you just went radio silent for 3 years? So I get this episode as a way to resolve that by just kind of the action cutting through the drama, but I think you did need to actually address the issues at the root of where this kind of conflict came from. As for the episode, you get Korra using divine power and has to explain it to Asami and Mako by saying, she learned it from Toph. Fun little dynamic of just her explaining her experience with a member of the old Team Avatar to the new team, and just that they know Lin, so Korra saying that to someone that's even more kind of cranky than Lin is just this impossible thing to consider, which is a fun little thing. Outside of that, it's just, the fight scene on the train is like perfectly fine. I don't think the action is like amazing up there. Asami gets her chance to properly hand-to-hand fight for the first time in this book, I believe. And Korra saves everyone by jumping off the train. It's a set piece moment, but it's not the most amazing set piece moment. And it's just that they've saved Wu, and they end off the side of the episode by Wu is going to be staying with Mako's family, who are living in Asami's house, and he likes it there because Grandma Yin is obsessed with the royalty, not just Queen Hu Ting. She's also obsessed with the whole family, and so seeing the prince is something that makes her faint. And it's going to be a part of his growth here that he stays with this family, knows, I suppose, his subjects basically, and has a bit of a change of heart, which he's already sort of started to have. And then the group just kind of reflects that, we're back together, except the only different thing was that we were sort of annoying each other a bit, but then they just kind of get across that, that's part of, in a way, being friends, that you annoy each other about certain things, but you're still very close. And it's just a very simple resolution to more complex issues, and I don't think it's particularly strong for like Korra and Asami's relationship, or Mako and Korra's relationship. It's just Reunion by the numbers, and I think it's always been an episode where this side of the episode, the main plot, has always just felt a little lacking to me. It's not bad, but it's not amazing, when it could have been really, really strong. The other side of the episode is much, much better, and that is the Bolin and Varric on the run, trying to get back to Republic City to kind of redeem themselves. I love Bolin's speech at the start, where he really kind of gets Varric going, that like they have to do this to kind of redeem themselves. They have to warn everyone about the weapon. And just the contrast of Bolin strong enough to carry Varric, but Varric can barely walk 2 steps with Bolin on his back. They get captured by people from the re-education camps, and this is the reveal here with Baraz and Anna's group being like fire water benders is that we get what ends up being another one of the very, like, questionable things they add to Kuvira in terms of her evilness, in terms of where did this come from. And that is, she's purging states in the Earth Kingdom from anyone who is not originally from the Earth Kingdom. So anyone who's a fire or waterbender is immediately kicked out. And the implication is also that anyone who is obviously from Fire Nation origin or Water Tribe origin is also kicked out. When I say kicked out, it's obviously much worse than that, the way they present it. Used as slaves, and basically, despite them living legally wherever they are now being considered like criminals just for being part of the Earth Empire, even though they're not from the Earth Kingdom. And it's just a case of like, okay, Kuvira has a point in what she's trying to do, and that she brought stability here. But what is she trying to accomplish by doing this? And this has always been the problem with Kuvira that I've had, is just, of all of the villains, I think she is the hardest one to get behind where on earth the villain aspect came from. Given that, like, she was, like, raised by Su, she's the adopted daughter of Su Yin Beifong, who hates world leaders, yet Kuvira, it turns into a tyrant in all of this. And they don't really get into, like, is it because she originally wanted to hand everything over, but then when she was in power, she realized she liked it? Is it? I'm not really sure. And just the lack of explanation on a lot of those origin kind of aspects of her, of what she exactly did to, like, get Batar on her side. What were the specifics of her leaving the city? What was her plan? How did it change? And they don't cover the shift. And again, I think Amon is a good comparison here, because here's a character who, when you reveal he's a waterbender, you have a big way to go to explain the apparent hypocrisy of a bender leading a group that opposes benders. And they do it well because they explain it. They cover a large period of his life as you see how he grows to consider bending this thing that destroyed his life, and he's going to use the fact that he is a bender as a tool to assist him in taking down bending overall. And that works despite the apparent confusion that you would have initially upon hearing that. Here, the story that she gives to Korra at the end isn't enough to explain this. The just blatant, like, racism towards the other nations, and the slavery, and how much he basically turns into, like, a kind of Ozai type character, a Chin the Conqueror type character throughout all of this. And I don't know what went wrong with Korra in the writing department in book 3 and 4, where they just felt that they didn't need to develop the villains as much. Because you notice a clear-cut difference between, like, Unalaq and Amon and Unalaq versus the Red Lotus and Kuvira. Now, obviously, people have their different preferences and stuff like that, but I think it's pretty clear to see that they develop Unalaq to explain where he kind of comes from. They develop Amon to explain where he comes from. They don't really do that with the Red Lotus. They explain, like, their ideology at one point to Korra, but that's all you get. With Kuvira, you get the explanation eventually, but does it explain everything that she's done? I don't particularly think so. Now, let's move past that criticism and just address what happens in this side of the episode. Baraz and Anna, as the kind of leaders of this kind of escape from the re-education camps, are actually pretty fun characters, because they're meant to be these kind of, like, alternate designs or something like that for Mako and for Korra and Mako, because you can tell that they both sort of look like Korra and Mako, and it's fun to see that they're obviously a little bit older than Mako and Korra are now, but that there's a clear like idea of where they've come from, and I like it because the issue here is that, like, Bolin has to convince them to trust him, and they have to obviously learn to trust people who are wearing Earth Empire uniforms. And I like that it comes out because it's literally just Bolin uses his lava bending, gets out of the situation that they're in, and just honestly says that, we need to do this together. And the trust comes from the fact that Bolin is so powerful, he could have taken them all out at any point. So Baraz trusts Bolin because he didn't kill them. He just created a barrier between them and talked to them. And by the end of the episode, you have that moment where Bolin comes back for them, and that's the final kind of thing of like, there is now a trust here between Bolin and this group. And it's meant to be this redemption moment of like, the reason he says, you didn't have to come back, and he's like, yeah, I did, is that it is his redemption moment. He has to do everything he can to oppose Kuvira now and stop what she's doing. And part of that is because he's going to ultimately have to redeem himself to Opal, but also his friends and everyone. So he has to, that's why he's pushing so hard on this and fighting so hard to get back. He has to make sure that this information that they have gets back to Republic City as soon as possible, and he is of help to stop Kuvira now. Varric gets his big moment where he makes the EMP when the action all breaks down. He also gets a nice chance to shine where he just like starts screaming at that guard to let them through, even though they don't have papers. I like that he just goes so overboard explaining like the situation that everyone's just getting really uncomfortable, because he's mentioning like his like blisters on his feet and stuff like that, calluses or whatever it is. So it's a well kind of acted episode for Varric, and the EMP shows a good. It ends up being like a plot point as well, in that EMPs can take down the Earth Empire weaponry. Why don't we use that against the Colossus later on? And obviously it doesn't fully work. So there's that. But it's a solid part of the episode. I think it works as part of Bolin's redemption arc, because you are really giving Bolin this kind of heroic arc, because he's so much more powerful now, and he has to play a leadership role within this group. He is the most powerful bender of all of these, and he has to kind of lead by example on the battlefield, and you can see that by the fact that he's holding off like 3 mecha tanks. He ultimately gets pinned down, because part of the idea of this fight is as well, he can't go full on like crazy with the lava bending, because there's so many like prisoners basically fighting around as well. And if he just engulfs the area in lava, everyone is put at risk, even his allies. So he has to kind of calm down on that. So he's restricted in a little way. He can't do exactly what he did to the other mecha tanks from before here. So it sort of explains why he's kind of on the back foot a bit here, but still some super powerful earth bending and lava bending from him that just demonstrates he is really, really, really powerful. And Team Avatar at this point is like a powerhouse team, because Mako's one of the best firebenders. Korra is obviously amazingly strong. Asami is right up there as in terms of non-bender fighters. And Bolin's a lava bender now, so super, super impressive. But yeah, that's most of the episode. The episode ends with Kuvira and Batar going into the swamp to get the swamp's spirit vines, because I suppose they're more powerful, because they're more ancient. And this is obviously meant to be this kind of terrible thing that she is defiling the swamp, this kind of location that she purposely hasn't gone into before, but now is going in to ruin. This is this thing where Kuvira isn't spiritual, so she's just completely moving past all of these kind of unwritten rules of like, you don't wreck spirit kind of areas. And here is something that she's doing. It's a bit of a weird one in that like the whole, like she's basically stealing from the spirits here in a way. She should be upsetting the spirits. It doesn't really end up being much of a plot point, because I would have been perfectly fine if the spirits decided that they wanted to oppose Kuvira because she is just showing a utter disregard for anything spiritual. That would have made complete sense, but instead they just decide that like, yeah, you stole their spirit vines, we're not happy about that, but we're not going to get involved still. It's just confusion about what's going on with the whole situation. But yeah, so it's a fine episode, Reunion, but it's not amazing. It could have been, but it really, to me, has always fallen flat, because you set it up so well. It's called Reunion, Korra's big return after 3 years, and you just don't do enough with it. It deserves some praise for, I think, honestly, for having, like, in my mind, like, the first really clear cut, Korra and Asami could be a thing after this. They're at least planting a seed here. Whereas, like, I think a lot of people almost interpret it where, like, the seed was planted, like, in the last book or even earlier. For me, like, this is the moment where I remember specifically on the podcast, it was pretty much this moment where we really talked about it for, like, the first time on the podcast, like, that Korra and Asami as a relationship could be something. And we were always, like, clued into what the fandom was thinking. We knew Korra Asami was a thing, but it was always, I think prior to this, just the relationship that, like, you almost felt like, okay, yeah, maybe, but they haven't shown anything about it yet. So, like, it's always been something that I've just really kind of been like, yeah, look, this is a clear cut scene, so it's not completely lacking in setup, but at the same time, like, we're more than halfway through book 4, and this is the first time Korra and Asami meet in the book, and you're going for this relationship of two characters that really haven't interacted all that much in the entire series. And while I think the scenes that they do with them in the last episode basically are good, the criticism of this relationship that it's lacking in development is absolutely valid in my opinion. And it's always something that I think is going to be present with this ship because of the stuff that's been explained to us by Mike and Brian, that they didn't know until, like, right at the end that they were allowed to do more setup for this. And in retrospect, they probably would have done more setup beforehand, but they couldn't. But it still makes it a criticism that, like, they left it until right at the end and still committed to, in a way, like, jumping past a bunch of setup scenes to commit to the relationship earlier. Like, I think it is just a case of, like, as we'll get to it, just, I've always felt that the final scene of the entire show being Korra and Asami and that relationship happening never felt like a good way to end the show. But yeah, this episode's, this is one of the ones that kind of frustrates me in a way. Like, this should have been a much better episode on the A-plot side of things, but it just wasn't. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on this episode. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.